Can I wash your bikes for a sandwich? The parking lot went dead silent. 90 Hells Angels turned and stared at the 17-year-old boy standing there, sunburned, half-starved, holding a dirty rag like it was the only thing he owned in the world. Because it was. Hawk Reynolds looked the kid up and down for a long moment. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then the big man said two words that would change Caleb Walker's life forever. First you eat. If you believe a single moment of courage can rewrite a person's entire future, subscribe to this channel, follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer that Caleb Walker turned 17 was the summer he learned that the world did not owe him anything. He had known hard times before. Growing up in a small desert town on the outskirts of Tucson, Arizona, hard times were practically a neighbor, always close, always knocking, always finding a way inside. But there is a difference between hard times and the kind of collapse that happens overnight, without warning, without mercy, without any road back to where you used to be. Caleb learned that difference the night his father walked out the front door and never came home. His name was Robert Walker, a man who had worked the same automotive parts warehouse for 11 years, who had never once missed a shift, who had come home every Friday with a check that wasn't big but was steady. Steady was the word his mother Emily always used. Your father's steady, she would say, the way another woman might say her husband was kind or generous. Steady was everything when steady was what kept the lights on and the rent paid and the refrigerator from going empty. Then the warehouse closed. They gave Robert Walker 2 weeks of severance and a handshake. He spent the first week sending out applications. He spent the second week staring at the television. He spent the week after that drinking in the garage, and the week after that drinking somewhere else. And then one morning, Caleb woke up to the sound of his mother crying in the kitchen and went downstairs to find her sitting at the table with a stack of unopened envelopes in front of her and a look on her face he had never seen before, the look of a woman who has finally run out of ways to pretend everything is going to be fine. Robert Walker had taken the truck the last $200 from their checking account and whatever piece of himself had once made him someone worth counting on. He left behind at least 3 months behind a medical bill from Emily's hospital visit the previous winter that they had been paying down $20 at a time, and a son who was 16 years old and suddenly the only functioning adult in the household. Caleb did not fall apart. That was the thing people never understood about him, the thing that would matter later when the story of what happened on that highway got passed from person to person across the Hells Angels network like a torch handed down a line. He did not curl up. He did not rage. He did not stand in his father's empty garage and cry until his knees gave out, though God knows he had every right to. He made a list. He sat down at that kitchen table next to his mother, and he asked her to show him every bill, every notice, every number. He made her show him the bank balance. He made her show him the lease. He looked at all of it the way a man twice his age might look at a problem that needed solving, not with despair, but with the specific kind of focus that comes from understanding there is no one else coming to help you. Rent overdue by 3 months, $1,100. Emily's medical bill still outstanding, $4,200. Utilities past due, $340. Food in the house enough for maybe another week, maybe 10 days if they were careful. Money available, $63 and some change. He looked at those numbers for a long time. Then he folded the papers back up, put them in a neat pile, and said to his mother, "I'm going to fix this." Emily Walker looked at her son across the kitchen table and said, "Caleb, baby, you're 16 years old." 17 in 2 weeks, he said, and got up and started washing the breakfast dishes. He spent the next 3 weeks knocking on every door in a 5-mile radius, not asking for charity, asking for work. There was a difference, and Caleb felt that difference in his chest every single time he walked up to a door. Because the moment you asked someone to just give you something, you handed them a piece of yourself you couldn't get back. He wasn't willing to do that, not yet. Not while he still had 2 working hands and enough sense to know how to use them. He offered to clean the hardware store on weekends. He offered to carry boxes for the grocery distributor who made deliveries on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. He offered to wash cars in the parking lot of the auto shop on Route 9, one of the few remaining businesses in town that still had foot traffic. He walked into the diner on 3rd Street and asked the owner, a heavy-set woman named Connie, if she needed anyone to bus tables or mop floors in the evenings. Most of them said no, some of them said it nicer than others. Sorry, kid, we're not hiring. Come back when you're 18. We don't really have anything right now. A few of them looked at him with a kind of sympathy that was worse than the rejection. The kind of look that said, I can see what's happening to you and I feel bad about it, but not bad enough to do anything. He learned to hate that look. He learned to keep his face neutral when he saw it coming, to say thank you for your time, and turn around and walk away without letting his shoulders drop until he was far enough down the sidewalk that no one could see. He did find a few things. He mowed lawns for 6 different houses on the east side of town, cash only $8 a lawn. He helped an elderly man named Mr. Garrett clean out a storage unit for a flat rate of $20. He found an informal arrangement with a woman 2 streets over who needed her trash cans dragged to the curb on Wednesday nights and back to the side of the house Thursday mornings for $5 a week. It wasn't enough. He knew it wasn't enough. But he kept going because the alternative was to stop, and stopping meant accepting something he was not ready to accept. His mother tried to get out of bed every morning. He watched her do it. He watched her push herself upright against the pain. The doctors had never fully explained the fatigue that had settled into her bones after the infection last winter and never entirely left. She would make it to the kitchen most days. She would try to cook. She would try to help. And Caleb would watch her grip the counter and breathe through her teeth and pretend he didn't notice. And she would watch him pretend he didn't notice. And neither of them talked about the fact that he was carrying something no 17-year-old was supposed to carry. She asked him once late one evening, when they were both sitting in the living room with the ceiling fan running because the air conditioning had stopped working, whether he ever thought about calling his father. Caleb thought about that for a moment. No, he said. She looked at him. I don't waste time on people who already told me who they are, he said. Emily didn't answer. She just reached over and put her hand over his, and for a minute they sat there in the heat together. And that was its own kind of conversation. He was 3 weeks into this when he found himself walking the stretch of old highway between town and the truck stop 5 miles east, because he had heard from Mr. Garrett's nephew that the truck stop sometimes hired day labor for unloading work cash at the end of the shift. It was a long walk in the July heat, and he had left early, but the sun had still gotten ahead of him. And by the time he reached the diner that sat about halfway between town and the truck stop, his water bottle was empty and his shirt was soaked through, and he was starting to feel the particular lightheadedness that means your body is running on less than it needs. He stopped, not because he had planned to, but because his legs had been walking for 2.5 hours under a sky like the inside of a furnace, and his body made a decision that his pride hadn't quite authorized yet. He stood on the shoulder of the highway and looked at the diner. It was a plain building, the kind that had probably been there since the 50s and hadn't changed much since, except for the parking lot expanding to accommodate the newer, bigger rigs. There was a hand-painted sign in the window advertising the lunch special. There was a cat asleep on the windowsill. And there were motorcycles, not 2 or 3, not a handful, dozens of them. Row after row of Harley-Davidsons lined up in the parking lot with the kind of orderly precision that spoke to people who took what they owned seriously. Big machines, all of them. Custom paint jobs. Chrome that caught the sun and threw it back hard enough to make you squint. And moving among them or sitting on the hoods of trucks parked nearby or standing in loose clusters near the diner entrance men. Big men, most of them. Men who wore leather in July because the leather was part of who they were, not an accessory. Men with road miles written in the lines of their faces with hands that looked like they had rebuilt engines from scratch, and maybe done other things too. Men with patches on their backs that Caleb recognized even from a distance because you grew up in this part of Arizona and you knew what those patches meant. Hell's Angels. He had been told, like every kid in town had been told, to give them a wide berth. Not because they were looking for trouble, they weren't. Mostly, at least, not with people who weren't looking for it themselves, but because you didn't walk into a situation you didn't understand. You didn't plant yourself in the middle of something that had its own rules you hadn't learned yet. Caleb stood there on the shoulder of the highway. He looked at the motorcycles. He thought about his mother at the kitchen table, gripping the counter, breathing through her teeth. He looked at his hands. They were good hands. He knew that. His grandfather, his mother's father, had been a mechanic for 40 years, and before the old man had passed, he had spent 3 summers showing Caleb things: how to read an engine, how to treat a machine with the kind of attention it deserved, how to clean something properly until it looked better than it had before you touched it. His grandfather had a saying, any fool can break something. It takes patience to make something last. Caleb pulled the cloth from his back pocket. It was a piece of chamois he had cut from an old cleaning rag, worn but not falling apart. He had carried it for weeks as a kind of calling card, the way a craftsman might carry a tool not to show off but to be ready. He walked into the parking lot. His heart was doing things hearts do when you are about to do something that terrifies you and you're doing it anyway. His hands weren't shaking yet, but they wanted to. He kept them still by force of focus the way his grandfather had taught him to keep his hands still on delicate work. The nearest rider was leaning against the side of a truck, one boot up on the running board reading something on his phone. He was a big man, not tall, but built wide across the shoulders with a silver-threaded beard and a quiet face, the kind of face that had learned a long time ago not to give away what was happening behind it. The name on his patch said Hawk. Below it, Arizona. Caleb stopped in front of him. The man looked up from his phone. He did not say anything. He just looked, which was somehow more intimidating than anything he could have said. Caleb cleared his throat. "Sir," the man waited. "I was wondering," Caleb started, then stopped, then started again because there was no version of this that got easier the longer he waited. "Can I wash your bikes for a sandwich?" The parking lot, which had been full of its own ordinary noise conversation, the scrape of boots, the distant sound of the highway went quiet. Not completely quiet, but the particular kind of quiet that happens when the people around you have all registered that something unexpected just occurred. Marcus Hawk Reynolds lowered his phone and looked at the boy in front of him, the way a man looks at something he has not seen in a while and is trying to place. Not with contempt, not with amusement, with the kind of attention that is its own form of respect even before the respect has been decided. Caleb felt every eye in the parking lot on him. He felt the weight of it the way you feel direct sunlight as pressure against your skin. He kept going because stopping now would be worse. "I'm not asking for money," he said. His voice was steadier than he expected. "I'll clean every bike you've got, every one of them properly. I just need something to eat." He held up the cloth. "This is all I have to show you, but I know how to do the work." Hawk looked at the cloth. He looked at the boy's hands. He looked at his face, the sunburn, the dehydration, the particular quality of determination that sits in someone's eyes when they have run out of easier options and are still choosing the harder path over the shameful one. And somewhere behind Hawk's quiet expression, something shifted. "How long you been walking?" Hawk asked. The question caught Caleb off guard. He had expected yes or no. He had not expected to be asked anything. "Since about 7 this morning," he said. Hawk looked at the sun. It was past noon by a good margin. "Where you headed?" "Truck stop east of here. Heard they might have day labor." "Heard from who?" "Man named Garrett. Lives over on Prescott Street." Hawk nodded slowly. Caleb did not know if the name meant anything to him or if he was just processing. "What's your name?" "Caleb. Caleb Walker." "How old are you, Caleb Walker?" 17. Hawk looked at him for another moment. Then he looked over his shoulder at a larger group of riders standing near the entrance to the Diners Men who had been watching this exchange with the casual attention of people who have seen a lot of things and are therefore difficult to surprise. He looked back at Caleb. "First you eat," he said. Caleb shook his head. The refusal came automatically from the same place everything else was coming from, the place in him that would not accept something it hadn't earned. "I need to work for it." Hawk straightened up off the truck. He was not particularly tall, but standing upright, he had a kind of gravity that made the distance between them feel smaller. "Son," he said with a patience that was not condescension, "nobody works with an empty stomach. That's not charity, that's physics." He turned toward the diner door. "Come on." Caleb stood there for exactly 2 seconds fighting something internal. Then he followed. Inside the diner, the air conditioning hit him like walking into a different world. He had forgotten what cool air felt like. He had forgotten what it felt like to not be holding his body against the heat. He stopped just inside the door and breathed for a second, and Hawk, who was already moving toward a booth, glanced back at him and waited. They sat across from each other. Connie, the owner, came over without being called. She looked at Caleb the way people look at something they recognize. "What do you want?" Hawk said, sliding the laminated menu across. Caleb looked at the menu. His eyes went to the prices first, the way they always did now. He found the cheapest thing, a grilled cheese and a glass of water. "That," he said, pointing. Hawk looked at the menu. He looked at Caleb. He looked at Connie. Burger, he said. Fries, large Coke, and whatever pie she's got left from this morning. Connie wrote it down and left. I didn't ask for all that, Caleb said. No, Hawk agreed. You didn't. I'm going to pay you back, when I can. Hawk looked at him with an expression that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood of one. We'll see, he said. The food came. Caleb ate. He ate the way you eat when you have not had a real meal in days. Not fast, but carefully, like each bite is something to be accounted for, something to be fully experienced rather than rushed through. He noticed himself doing it and felt a flicker of embarrassment, and then pushed the embarrassment down because there was nothing shameful about being hungry, and there was nothing shameful about eating when you were hungry, and he was done letting shame make decisions for him. Hawk watched him eat, not intrusively, not with pity, just the way a person watches when they're thinking about something. You said you know how to take care of machines, Hawk said after a while. My grandfather was a mechanic, Caleb said. 40 years. He taught me the basics. What kind of basics? Engines, oil changes, brake systems. He was old school. He thought if you understood the machine, really understood it, you could take care of anything. He said most people just learn the surface. He taught me the underneath. How old were you when he started teaching you? 11. He died when I was 14. Caleb said it without flinching because it was true, and he had had 3 years to get used to carrying it. But I remember everything he showed me. Hawk nodded. And the cleaning, he said, the bikes. Same principle, Caleb said. You don't just wipe the surface. You work from the inside out. Attention to detail. You take care of the parts other people skip because they're not obvious. Hawk was quiet for a moment. Then what happened? Why are you out here? It was a direct question, the kind of question that didn't leave you a lot of room to sidestep. Caleb looked at his plate for a second, then back up. My dad left, he said, few months ago. Bill's backed up. My mom's sick, nothing terminal, but she can't work right now. I've been trying to pick up enough to keep us going. How long have you been doing that? Since May. School. I'm going back in September. I haven't dropped out. He said it like it was important because it was. I just need to get through the summer. Hawk looked at him. You got any other family? No, sir. Silence. Okay, Hawk said. Eat the rest of the pie. Caleb looked at the slice of apple pie Connie had brought with the meal, golden crust, generous portion, the kind of thing that in another life would have been ordinary, and in this life felt like it had been placed in front of him by something bigger than chance. He ate the pie. When they went back outside, Hawk walked him over to the motorcycles. He did not make a production of it. He simply said, show me what you know, and stepped back. Caleb went to work. He didn't start with the nearest bike. He started with an assessment, walked the line slowly, not touching, yet just looking, reading what each machine needed. He was doing the thing his grandfather had taught him, see the whole picture before you touch any part of it. Don't start anywhere until you know where everything is. He started with the bike that needed the most attention. He was methodical. He worked from the top down, paying attention to the seams, the joints, the places where dust and grease accumulated in layers. The chrome got the most care. He understood what chrome was. It was vulnerable under its shine, and the worst thing you could do to it was work it wrong and leave micro scratches that turned dull under sunlight. He worked. A few of the riders drifted over, not saying anything, just watching with the particular attention of people who know a craft when they see it. One of them, a big man with a red beard who wore his size the way a building wears its foundation, crossed his arms and watched Caleb work on the third bike for a solid 5 minutes without speaking. Then he said, "You've done this before." "Yes, sir," Caleb said without stopping. "Not just bikes." "No, sir, my grandfather's shop, anything that came in." The big man, Tom Bear Collins, as Caleb would learn, made a low sound in his chest that was not quite approval and not quite surprise, but was somewhere between the two. "He teach you engine work, too, or just the surface?" Caleb looked up. "He taught me everything," he said. "The surface was just where we started." Bear looked at him for another moment. Then he looked over at Hawk, who was standing nearby with a cup of coffee, watching with his usual economy of expression. Something passed between the two older men, some wordless communication of the kind that forms between people who have known each other long enough that the words become optional. Bear looked back at Caleb. "You hear about a shop in town called Ridgeline Repair?" Caleb shook his head. Off the main road past the feed store. They do custom work mostly. Harley's Indian, some European stuff. Bear paused. The owner's a friend. He's been looking for a kid who's not afraid to actually learn. Caleb stopped working. He looked up carefully, not wanting to read too much into what was being said. I'm not making any prompting, Bear said, reading his expression. I'm just saying you might want to know that. Caleb nodded once, then went back to work. He cleaned every motorcycle in that parking lot, every single one. He took 2 hours, and he did not rush a single inch of it. By the time he finished the last bike, his shirt was soaked again. His hands ached, and the parking lot had shifted. Some riders had gone inside, others had come out, the natural rhythm of a long rest stop. But there were still eyes on him. There had been eyes on him for most of the afternoon, he realized. Quiet, attentive measuring. He stood up from the last bike, put the cloth in his back pocket, and turned to find Hawk standing behind him. Done, Caleb said. Hawk looked at the line of motorcycles, then at Caleb. You didn't miss anything, he said. It was not a compliment exactly. It was an observation. But from a man like Hawk, that was a more valuable thing. I don't do half work, Caleb said. Hawk almost smiled. Almost. No, he said, I can see that. He pulled a 20 out of his wallet and held it toward Caleb. Caleb shook his head. We agreed on a sandwich. Hawk looked at him. We agreed on a sandwich. I'm not paying for the job. I'm paying because you did the job right, and that's worth more than we agreed. Caleb looked at the 20. Every rational part of him understood that $20 was $20, that his mother needed that $20, that there was no version of his life right now in which turning down $20 was a smart move. But something in him, the thing that had gotten him here, the thing that had kept him upright through 3 months of closed doors and polite rejections in a father-shaped hole where the floor used to be balked. You paid for the meal, he said. That was the deal. I don't want more than the deal. Hawk looked at him for a long moment. Then he put the 20 back in his wallet. All right, Caleb Walker, he said quietly. And for reasons Caleb would not understand until much later, the fact that he had refused seemed to matter more than anything else that had happened that afternoon. He was putting the cloth back in his pocket, getting ready to continue his walk east toward the truck stop, when it happened. A luxury pickup truck, the kind that cost more than most people in that town, made in a year dark blue, with polished rims and a dealer sticker still visible on the bumper, came swinging fast into the far end of the parking lot. Too fast moving with the casual disregard of a man who had decided a long time ago that his time was worth more than anyone else's caution. The driver was on his phone. He didn't look as he swung wide, backing out of the turn, and the rear corner of his truck connected with one of the motorcycles at the end of the row with a sound that cut through every other sound in the parking lot like a blade, metal against metal. The motorcycle, a beautiful machine, Caleb had just spent 20 minutes on it, rocked hard on its kickstand, and then went over. The crunch of it hitting the pavement was something you felt in your chest. The truck stopped. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the driver looked in his mirror. Caleb saw his face clearly, a man in his 40s, heavy in the jaw, the kind of man who wore his money on the outside the way some men wear it in the bank. His eyes went to the downed motorcycle. His eyes went to the parking lot full of Hell's Angels, all of whom had turned at the sound. The calculation moved across his face in less than 3 seconds. He decided. He pulled forward and drove away. Caleb watched the truck reach the highway and turn east. He watched the license plate until he couldn't see it anymore. He memorized it anyway. Then he looked at the motorcycle lying on the ground and at Hawk walking toward it and at the particular quality of the silence that had settled over the parking lot. Hawk crouched next to the bike. He didn't say anything. He just looked at the damage, the bent frame, the shattered running light, the scratch that ran across the tank like a wound. He stood up. He looked around the parking lot. Did anyone see what happened? His voice was quiet, which was somehow more serious than loud would have been. Nobody said anything. People looked at the ground. People looked at each other. And then Caleb Walker, who was 17 years old and had nothing, who had spent 3 months learning that the world was harder than anyone had prepared him, for who had walked 5 miles in July heat to a truck stop on the chance that someone might give him an afternoon's work, stepped forward. I did, he said. Every eye in that parking lot swung toward Caleb, not with hostility, with something harder to read than that, the kind of attention that takes the full measure of a person before deciding what they are. Hawk stood next to the downed motorcycle with his arms at his sides, and he looked at the boy who had just stepped forward, and for a moment the only sound was the highway traffic passing 50 yards away, indifferent as always to whatever was happening on the side of the road. "You saw it," Hawk said. "It wasn't a question. It was a door being held open." "Yes, sir," Caleb said. "All of it." Bear moved from his position near the diner entrance, covering the distance in unhurried strides. He stopped next to Hawk and looked at the motorcycle on the ground, at the damage the way a man reads a sentence, taking in the whole meaning at once. Then he looked at Caleb. "Dark blue pickup," Caleb said before anyone asked. "Full size, late model, maybe 2-3 years old. Dealer sticker on the rear bumper. I couldn't read the name from where I was standing. Arizona plates." He recited the number from memory, all 7 characters in order without hesitation. The parking lot stayed quiet. Bear looked at Hawk. Hawk looked at Caleb. "You sure about that plate?" Bear said. "I'm sure," Caleb said. "You only saw it for a few seconds." "I know, I was paying attention." Bear's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. He pulled out his phone and stepped away, moving toward the edge of the lot where the conversation would be private. Hawk watched him go and then looked back at the motorcycle on the ground. He crouched next to it again, ran his hand along the scratch on the tank, a long, ugly gouge that cut through the custom paint like it had been done with intent, even though it hadn't been. It had been done with something worse than intent. It had been done with indifference. "Whose bike?" Caleb asked quietly. "Danny Reyes," Hawk said. "He's inside. He doesn't know yet." Caleb nodded. "He's going to be upset." "Yes," Hawk said, standing. "He is." What Caleb did not know then, what he wouldn't learn until much later, when the story had already run its full course, was that the motorcycle on the ground was not just a motorcycle. Danny Reyes had spent 4 years building that bike from a rolling frame up. It represented a specific period of his life, the years after his divorce, the years when he had been putting himself back together, piece by piece, and the bike had been how he did it. Every part chosen deliberately. Every hour in the shop intentional. The tank had been painted by a woman in Flagstaff who was the best in the state, and Danny had driven 6 hours each way, twice to get it done right. It was the kind of object that holds a life inside it, and the man who had knocked it over hadn't even slowed down. Hawk said, "You don't have to get involved in this." Caleb looked at him. "I already am. I mean officially. If this goes anywhere, police insurance, whatever it goes, you being a witness means you get pulled into it." Caleb understood what he was saying. He also understood what he was not saying, which was the more important thing, that being a witness against a man like Grant Holloway and Hawk was already beginning to understand from what Bear was finding on his phone who the truck belonged to was not a neutral act. It had consequences. It had weight. And for a 17-year-old with no money, no job, and a sick mother at home, weight was the last thing he needed more of. Caleb said, "I saw what happened. If someone asked me, I'm going to say what I saw." Hawk looked at him for a long time. "All right," he said. The diner door opened and a man came out, lean mid-30s, dark hair, the kind of face that carries its emotions close to the surface rather than buried under years of practice keeping them there. Danny Reyes stopped on the step and looked at the parking lot, looked at the empty space where his motorcycle should have been, looked at it lying on the ground. He walked to it, crouched, put his hand on the tank the way you touch something that's hurt. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then, "How bad a frame might be bent," Hawk said quietly. "The tank's scratched. Running light is gone. We don't know the full damage yet." "Who did it?" Hawk told him about the truck, about the driver, about the license plate that Caleb had memorized, and Bear was now running down through channels Caleb had no knowledge of and no interest in asking about. Danny looked up at Caleb. "You saw it?" "Yes." "And he just left." "He looked in the mirror," Caleb said. "He saw it. Then he drove away." Danny stood up. There was something in his face that was not anger exactly, or not only anger, it was the particular expression of someone who has been trying very hard to believe the world is basically fair and has just been handed evidence to the contrary. 4 years, he said to no one in particular. Caleb said, "I'm sorry." Danny looked at him. "You didn't do anything." "I know. I'm still sorry." That small exchange, those 6 words between them, was the beginning of something Caleb didn't have a name for yet. It would take him years to understand it. The way a shared moment of helplessness in front of an injustice can bind 2 people more effectively than any shared success. Danny Reyes would remember those words. He would mention them years later when he tried to explain what had happened that afternoon and why it mattered. He said he was sorry, Danny would say. Not because it was his fault, because he knew it hurt. Bear came back from the edge of the parking lot. He looked at Hawk, he looked at Danny, then he said the name, Grant Holloway. The name landed differently on different people. Some of the riders knew it immediately, a visible shift in their posture, the kind of recalibration that happens when a situation you thought was one thing turns out to be another. Others were hearing it for the first time and taking their cues from the reactions around them. Caleb didn't know the name at all. "Who is he?" he asked. Bear answered without inflection, the way you state facts that are uncomfortable. "Owns about a third of the commercial property in this county, has a construction company, a car dealership, and a hand in about 4 other businesses I don't feel like listing. He's got money, he's got lawyers, and he's got a habit of treating this part of the state like his personal parking lot." Bear paused. "And apparently that extends to actual parking lots." Caleb processed that. "Is he going to come back?" "Probably not today," Bear said. "Men like that don't come back the same day. They send someone." He was right. It took less than 40 minutes. The vehicle that pulled into the parking lot was a different truck, silver this time county vehicle, and behind it a patrol car. Caleb watched them come in and understood immediately that the situation had shifted in a way he hadn't anticipated. He had expected, if anything, that the police would be called by Hawk or Bear. He had not expected them to arrive with someone who had a stake in the outcome. The man who got out of the silver truck moved with the specific assurance of someone who has never had to wonder whether a room would accommodate him. He was in his mid-40s, the kind of heavy set that comes from good restaurants and no physical labor, dressed in business clothes that had probably cost more than Caleb's mother made in a month. He wore his authority the way other men wear a jacket, as something he had put on so long ago he had stopped noticing the weight. Grant Holloway stood in the parking lot of a roadside diner outside Tucson, Arizona, and looked around at the Hells Angels and the damaged motorcycle and the 17-year-old boy standing among them, and his expression said, "I have already decided how this ends." The officer who came with him was young mid-20s, knew enough that the junk still showed in how he held himself, that particular combination of authority and uncertainty that fades eventually, but never fully in the early years. His name tag said Officer Briggs. He looked at the parking lot with the careful neutrality of a man trying to understand the situation before committing to anything. Holloway pointed at the group near the damaged motorcycle. "That's them," he said to Briggs. "I was driving through the lot, and these men threatened me. That's why I had to leave. I felt my safety was at risk." The silence that followed was the specific kind that happens when something has been said that everyone present knows is not true, and everyone is calculating the cost of saying so. Officer Briggs looked at the damaged motorcycle. He looked at Hawk and Bear and Danny Reyes and the other riders. He looked at Caleb, then he looked at Holloway. "Sir, can you describe the nature of the threat?" Holloway spread his hands. "Look at them. I pulled into this lot to get a coffee. These men surrounded my vehicle, and I left because I was afraid. Now they've apparently vandalized my truck with..." He glanced at the motorcycle on the ground. "Whatever this is they're doing." Bear said very calmly, "Your vehicle struck that motorcycle when you left. We have the plate. We have a witness." Holloway looked at Bear the way you look at a piece of furniture that has unexpectedly spoken. Then he looked around for the witness. His eyes landed on Caleb. He took in the worn boots, the repaired shirt, the youth. He made his calculation in about 3 seconds, the same calculation he had made in his mirror before he drove away, and he came to the same conclusion. He smiled. "That kid?" He said it without lowering his voice because he didn't think he needed to. "He was hanging around the lot when I got here. I don't know who he is. He's probably homeless." Caleb felt the word land in his chest the way a stone lands in water, quick impact spreading ripple. He kept his face neutral. Officer Briggs looked at Caleb. "Son, were you present in this parking lot when the alleged incident occurred?" "Yes, sir," Caleb said. "And you witnessed the vehicle making contact with the motorcycle?" "Yes, sir." "Can you describe what you saw?" Caleb described it, clearly, specifically, in order. The speed of the truck coming in the angle of the reverse turned the moment of contact, the way the motorcycle rocked and fell, the pause before Holloway drove away. He gave it without embellishment and without hesitation, The way you give information when you are telling the truth, and truth is sufficient. Holloway's smile didn't leave his face, but it changed quality, became thinner. Officer, he said with respect, you're going to take the word of some kid who looks like he hasn't eaten in a week over a tax-paying business owner who has been a member of this community for 20 years. Briggs looked at Caleb again. Then he looked at Holloway. Sir, I need to take a statement from everyone present. That includes you. Holloway's smile disappeared entirely. I don't think you understand who you're talking to, he said. His voice had taken on a different quality, still controlled, but with something harder underneath it, the way smooth water sounds different when there's current beneath the surface. Briggs said, I understand that an incident has been reported involving property damage and a possible hit and run. I need statements from all parties before I can make any determination. That's the process. The word hit and run had a visible effect on Holloway's posture. Not fear exactly, but the recognition that the situation had the potential to become more complicated than he had anticipated. People who are used to being the only complicated variable in a room are always caught slightly off guard when other variables appear. He looked at Caleb again. This time there was no smile. You don't know what you're starting, he said. Not loudly, quietly, the way people say things they mean. Caleb looked at him. He thought about his grandfather who had told him once that honesty was not always the profitable thing, but it was always the load-bearing thing, the piece you couldn't remove without everything else collapsing. He had not entirely understood what that meant at 11 years old. He was beginning to understand it now. I'm not starting anything, Caleb said. I'm just saying what I saw. Holloway held his gaze for a moment. Then he turned back to Officer Arnold Briggs, and the whole shape of his manner changed, became cooperative, reasonable, the performance of a man who has been misunderstood and is graciously willing to clear it all up. He gave his statement. He was calm, articulate, and detailed in the way that people who have given statements before are calm and articulate. He acknowledged that he had perhaps made contact with the vehicle regrettable. Truly, he hadn't realized. He would, of course, be willing to discuss appropriate compensation through proper channels. No need to make this bigger than it was. But his eyes twice went back to Caleb, and Caleb understood that he had made an enemy. The understanding didn't make him regret the decision, but it sat in his stomach differently than he expected, heavier, more specific. He had been up against hardship before. He had been up against closed doors and empty bank accounts and the particular loneliness of being the only person standing between his family and nothing. He had not been up against a specific human being who had resources and motive, and now a reason to look at him by name. After Briggs finished taking statements, and the patrol car left, and Holloway's silver truck pulled out of the lot with a deliberateness that was itself a kind of message. The parking lot redistributed itself. People talked. The quiet, efficient communication of a group that has its own internal logic. Bear came and stood next to Caleb. You holding up? Yes, sir. That wasn't nothing what you just did. Caleb looked at him. It wasn't anything. I told the truth. I know about this, Bear said. That's what I said. Danny Reyes came over a few minutes after that. He stood next to Caleb, and they both looked at the motorcycle which a few of the riders had carefully lifted and stabilized, examining the damage with the practiced attention of men who understood machines. You didn't have to do that, Danny said. Yet I did, Caleb said. Why? Caleb thought about how to answer that, not because he didn't know, but because the knowing was in a part of him that was harder to reach with words. Because I watched him look in the mirror, he said finally. He saw it, he knew, and he made a choice. He paused. I guess I had to make mine. Danny was quiet for a moment. He's going to come after you, but he said, not as a threat, as a fact. I know. You got somewhere to be. People around you. Caleb thought about his mother in the house with the broken air conditioning and the stack of bills on the kitchen table. I've got my mom, he said. Danny nodded slowly. Hawk reappeared from the direction of the diner. He had been on the phone several calls Caleb had noticed made in the efficient way of someone who is putting things in motion rather than having conversations. He stopped in front of Caleb. What are you planning to do now, he said. Finish walking to the truck stop, Caleb said. See if the day labor's still available. Hawk looked at him. It's after 3, he said. Caleb looked at the sun. He was right. By the time he walked 5 more miles east, any afternoon labor would be long filled. He felt the specific deflation of a plan collapsing. He had been running on forward motion all day. The walk, the motorcycles, the confrontation with Holloway, and now the forward motion had run into a wall. He stood in the parking lot with 2 hours of daylight left and no clear next move, and he felt the weight of the day settle onto him all at once. He didn't show it. He recalculated. I can go back to town, he said. There's a grocery store that sometimes needs help with cart returns in the evening. It's not much, but it's something. That's another 2.5 miles, Hawk said. I walked here, Caleb said. I can walk back. Hawk looked at him for a long moment. The expression on his face was not pity. Caleb would have clocked pity immediately, and pity would have ended the conversation. It was something else. Something more like the way a carpenter looks at a piece of wood that has been worked in the wrong direction and is determining whether there is still something sound at the center. Bear told me what you said about Ridgeline Repair, Caleb said. I appreciate it. I'm going to go by there. Tomorrow morning, Bear said from nearby. He had apparently been listening. Before 9, ask for a man named Ray Dominguez. Tell him Tom Collins sent you. Caleb repeated the name. Ray Dominguez. And don't call him Bear, Hawk said. Call him Tom. Bear gave Hawk a look. Hawk almost smiled. Caleb said, yes, sir. One more thing, Hawk said. He reached into his jacket. Not for his wallet. Caleb's entire posture tightened at the possibility already preparing the refusal. Hawk watched him do it and shook his head slightly. He pulled out a card, plain white, just a name and a phone number handwritten. If anything happens, Hawk said, with Holloway or otherwise, you call this. Caleb took the card. He looked at it. The name on it was Marcus Reynolds, and the number below it had an Arizona area code. What's going to happen? Caleb said. Probably nothing, Hawk said. Men like Holloway usually calculate their risks and leave things alone when it costs them something. But he looked at you twice. Men who do that are making a note. And if he comes after my family... The parking lot went quiet in a particular way. Hawk looked at him steadily. You call that number, he said. Caleb put the card in his back pocket next to the chamois cloth. He started walking. He had covered maybe 30 yards already, recalculating the math of the walk back to town when he heard his name. Caleb. He turned around. Bear was standing at the edge of the parking lot, keys in his hand. Get in, he said, tilting his head toward a truck parked along the far edge of the lot. I'll drive you to town. Caleb almost argued. He opened his mouth to argue. Bear held up one hand. Don't, Bear said. Just get in the truck. Caleb got in the truck. They drove back toward town in a silence that was not uncomfortable, the silence of two people who have already said what mattered and don't feel the need to fill the remaining space with noise. The desert moved past the windows in shades of rust and ochre, and Caleb watched it without really seeing it, his mind already ahead, already working the next problem. Bear spoke first when the first buildings of town were visible on the horizon. You know what you did back there? I gave a statement, Caleb said. You gave a statement to a police officer in front of a man with a lot of money and a reason to make your life difficult, Bear said. That's different from just giving a statement. I know. And you did it anyway. Yes, sir. Bear was quiet for a moment. My father used to say that character is what you do when the cost is real, he said. Not when it's comfortable, not when it's safe, when it actually costs you something. He glanced at Caleb. Today cost you something. Caleb thought about that. It cost me less than lying would have, he said. Bear looked at the road. Yeah, he said quietly. Yeah, that's exactly right. He dropped Caleb at the corner of 3rd Street in Maine. Caleb got out and Bear leaned across the seat. Ridgeline Repair. Tomorrow morning before 9, Ray Dominguez. I've got it, Caleb said. And Caleb. He looked back. That card Hawk gave you. Keep it on you. Not in a drawer, on you. Caleb nodded. Bear drove away. Caleb stood at the corner of 3rd and Main with the card in his back pocket and his cloth next to it, and he looked at the street that led to his house, and he thought about going home and telling his mother about the day. He thought about how to explain the Hells Angels without frightening her. He thought about how to explain Grant Holloway without frightening her even more. He thought about Danny Reyes crouching next to his motorcycle with his hand on the scratched tank, and the way Bear had said, character is what you do when the cost is real. He walked home. His mother was in the kitchen when he came in, sitting at the table with a cup of tea, which meant it had been a better day than most. She could make tea on a better day. She looked at him when he came through the door, and her face did the thing it always did, the scan that mothers do reading the day in the posture, in the expression, in the weight of him. "You look different," she said. "Long day," he said. She looked at him for a moment longer. "Are you okay?" He sat down across from her at the table that had been the center of too many serious conversations this year, and he looked at his hands and he thought about how to answer that honestly. "I think so," he said. She waited. "Mom," he said, "have you ever heard of a man named Grant Holloway?" She set down her tea. The way she set it down told him she had. "Where did you hear that name?" she said. "I met him today," Caleb said. "Sort of." Emily Walker looked at her son across the kitchen table, and something in her expression shifted, not to fear exactly, but to the kind of careful attention that comes from understanding that the thing you were afraid of has moved from possible to actual. "Tell me," she said. He told her. He told her about the diner and the motorcycles and Hawk and the meal. He told her about cleaning the bikes and what Bear had said about Ridgeline repair. He told her about the truck and the sound it made, and Danny Reyes' hand on the tank. And he told her about stepping forward. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet except for the fan and the distant sound of a neighbor's television. Emily looked at her son. "You gave your name to a police officer and told the truth about a man like Grant Holloway," she said. "Yes." "Caleb." "Mom." "I know why you did it," she said quickly, not angry, not even afraid quite. Something more precise than either of those. "I know exactly why you did it. You did it because it was right." "Yes," he said. "And I'm not telling you it was wrong," she said. "I'm not going to tell you that. But I need you to know that man has done things to people in this town that never got answered for. And he does not forget." Caleb looked at her. "Did something happen with us?" he said. "Before with Holloway." She looked at her tea for a moment. "Your father," she said, "when he was still working. There was a situation with the warehouse. A contract. Holloway had a hand in the company that owned the building." She paused. "There were complaints about conditions, safety things. Your father signed his name to one of the complaints." Caleb went very still. "And then the warehouse closed," he said. Emily didn't answer. She didn't need to. Caleb sat with me for a long time. The thing he had been stepping around the question of why the warehouse had closed specifically when it had the way it had suddenly had a different shape. He pulled Hawk's card from his back pocket and put it on the table. Emily looked at it. "What's that?" she said. "Someone told me to keep it on me," he said. "But I want you to know it exists." She looked at the name, Marcus Reynolds. She looked at the number. She looked at her son. "Are you safe?" she said. "I think so," he said. "Yes." She picked up the card, turned it over, put it back on the table between them. Outside, the desert evening was settling in the way it always did, the temperature dropping just enough to notice the quality of the light going golden, and then amber, and then the deep rose that you only got in this part of the country, the sky doing the thing it did here that made people who had grown up here and left eventually talk about it when they were somewhere else. Caleb watched his mother's face in that light. She looked tired. She looked older than she was. But she also looked like herself, which was more than she had managed on some days this summer, and he was grateful for it. "I have somewhere to be tomorrow morning," he said, before 9 p.m. "Ridgeline repair," she said. He looked at her. "You know it. Ray Dominguez," she said. "He taught your grandfather's apprentice about 15 years ago. Your grandfather used to say he was one of the best he'd seen." Caleb stared at her. "Why didn't you ever tell me about him?" Emily looked at her son with the expression of a woman who has been quietly holding a lot of pieces in place and is deciding which ones to finally put down. "Because I was hoping it wouldn't come to this," she said, then softer. "And because I think some things are better found when you're ready for them. Not before." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. "Go tomorrow," she said, "early, and Caleb." She squeezed his hand once the way she had when he was small, and the world had been manageable and father had still been a word that meant something dependable. "Whatever they offer you, take it. Don't argue about whether you have earned it." He almost smiled. "No promises," he said. She shook her head. "You are exactly like your grandfather," she said. And for the first time that day, that long, burning, complicated, consequential day, Caleb Walker let himself feel something other than forward motion. He let himself feel the specific warmth of being known by someone who had known him his whole life. He let himself feel for just a moment like something other than a problem to be solved. Then he got up and started washing the dishes, because there was still tomorrow, and tomorrow required everything he had. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew sitting at that table in the amber evening light, was that 40 miles away in an office with a view and a leather chair and a phone that rang when it was told to ring, Grant Holloway had just made his first call. Not to his lawyer, to someone who answered problems before they became problems. And in a parking lot outside a roadside diner, a phone buzzed in Marcus Hawk Reynolds' jacket pocket, and he looked at the screen and his expression went very still. The day was not over yet. The call Hawk had received that night was from a man named Vince Tully. Vince was not someone most people in that part of Arizona knew by name, but they knew his work the way you know weather by what it left behind. He was the kind of person Grant Holloway kept on a long leash for situations that required neither violence nor legality, but occupied the space between them. A fixer, a pressure applier, a man who understood that the most effective way to make a problem disappear was not to attack it directly, but to make the ground beneath it unstable until it sank on its own. Hawk had dealt with men like Vince before. He had dealt with men like Grant Holloway before. What he had not dealt with before was a 17-year-old boy who had walked into the middle of it carrying nothing but a chamois cloth and a refusal to lie. He sat in his motel room that night. The chapter had booked a block of rooms at a place 2 miles from the diner, a regular stop on a route they ran twice a year, and he held his phone and he thought about Caleb Walker. He thought about the way the boy had stepped forward in that parking lot. He thought about the way he had recited the license plate 7 characters in order from memory, without being asked, without hesitation. He thought about the way he had refused the $20, not out of stupidity, but out of something more durable than pride. He thought about what Bear had told him on the drive back, repeating what Caleb had said, "It cost me less than lying would have." Hawk had been riding with the Angels since he was 23 years old. He was 51 now. In those 28 years, he had met a lot of people, and he had developed the kind of judgment about character that only comes from being wrong about it enough times to understand the difference. He had been wrong about people who looked solid. He had been right about people who looked like nothing. Caleb Walker looked like nothing by most measures. Worn boots, repaired shirt, a backpack that had seen better decades. But there was something in him that Hawk recognized the way you recognize a quality of steel, not by its shine, because steel that's been used doesn't shine, but by the way it holds its shape under pressure. He called Bear. "You get home all right." "Just got in," Bear said. "You see what Vince sent?" "I saw it." "He's not wasting time." "No," Hawk said, "he's not." What Vince had sent was simple 3 lines of text, no greeting, no signature. The way people communicate when they want deniability. It said, the witness is a minor. No employment, no income, no standing. Retraction would be in everyone's interest. Time sensitive. Bear said, "He's going after the kid." "He's going after the kid," Hawk agreed. "Through the landlord, probably. Maybe the family. Holloway's got fingers in the rental properties on that side of town. We checked after you told me what the boy said about the bills." Hawk absorbed that. "How many?" "Enough. The building their lease is through, that's a management company called Sun State Properties. Holloway's a silent partner. Has been for 6 years. The kitchen table, the stack of bill, the rent 3 months overdue." Hawk said, "The boy doesn't know." "No reason he would," Bear said. "The connection's buried 2 layers down." Hawk was quiet for a moment. "He's going to get an eviction notice," he said. "Not a question. If Holloway decides to push it, yes. Probably within the week. The lease violation is already technically there 3 months back, is grounds enough. He just hasn't enforced it because there was no reason to, until now. Until a 17-year-old boy stepped forward in a parking lot and gave a license plate number to a police officer. Hawk said, "Wake Danny up. It's after midnight." "I know what time it is. Wake Danny up." There was a pause, then the sound of movement, and Bear said, "Hold on." Hawk waited. He thought about Caleb Walker walking home in the desert evening with a card in his back pocket, going home to a mother who was sick and bills that were past due, going home to cook dinner or wash dishes or do whatever it was he did to keep the frame of his life standing, and not knowing that the ground beneath it was already being undermined. Danny came on the line, his voice rough with interrupted sleep. "Hawk." "Your bike," Hawk said. "You filed the report. Briggs took my statement this afternoon, said he'd follow up with Holloway tomorrow. Holloway's already moved. He's going after the witness. A pause. The kid, Danny said. The kid. Another pause longer. What do? Danny said. We don't do anything tonight, Hawk said. Tonight we find out exactly what we're dealing with. Tomorrow we decide what comes next. He paused. But Danny, that boy, stood up for your motorcycle today when he had every reason not to, when it could cost him everything he didn't have. I know, Danny said quietly. I want you to remember that. I haven't forgotten it, Danny said. I won't. Hawk ended the call. He sat in the quiet of the motel room and looked at the ceiling and thought about the way things accumulated, small decisions, small moments, the individual grains that together became the weight that either built something or buried it. He thought about a boy who had walked 5 miles in July heat to ask for work. He thought about a man who had looked in his rearview mirror, understood exactly what he had done, and driven away anyway. Then he picked up his phone and made 3 more calls. Caleb did not sleep well. He had not told his mother about the call Hawk mentioned the text Vince had sent because he didn't know about it yet. But some part of him, the part that had been paying close attention to the world for the past 3 months, because paying close attention was the only advantage he had understood, that stepping forward in that parking lot had opened something. He didn't know what shape it would take. He didn't know when it would arrive. But he understood that Grant Holloway was not the kind of man who absorbed a loss and moved on. He understood that from the 2 times the man had looked at him, from the specific quality of the words, "You really want to do this? You have no idea who you're fighting against." He lay in the dark and he thought about Ray Dominguez and Ridgeline Repair and whether there was any version of tomorrow that was better than today. He thought about his mother's hand on his and the way she had said, "You are exactly like your grandfather," and he held on to that, the way you hold on to something small and warm in a cold room. He was up before 5. He was at Ridgeline Repair by 8:15. The shop was on a side street behind the feed store, exactly where Bear had said it would be. Caleb heard it before he saw it, the particular sound of a shop that is already working at that hour, the controlled noise of power tools and metal and purpose. He pushed the door open and the smell hit him first, because the smell of a good shop is something that goes directly to a specific place in the brain, bypassing everything else. Oil and metal and rubber and the particular warm smell of work being done correctly. A man was bent over an engine at the nearest bench. Late 40s, compact, with the forearms of someone who had been doing this his whole life. He didn't look up when Caleb came in. "We're not open for customers until 9, he said. "I'm not a customer," Caleb said. "Tom Collins sent me." The man looked up. Ray Dominguez had a face that had spent a lot of time making fast, accurate judgments about things. He looked at Caleb for about 4 seconds. "You're the kid from the diner," he said. Caleb blinked. "How do you know about that?" "Bear called me last night," Ray said. "At midnight, which I'm going to have words with him about eventually." He set down his tool and straightened. "He told me what you did." "I cleaned some motorcycles," Caleb said. "He told me the other part." Caleb was quiet. Ray looked at him. "You have any experience with engines?" "Real experience, not YouTube videos." "My grandfather was a mechanic," Caleb said. 40 years. I started working next to him when I was 11. He died when I was 14, but I remember everything he showed me." "Who was your grandfather?" "Earl Massey," Caleb said. "He had a shop on the south side until about 8 years ago." Something moved across Ray Dominguez's face. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition, the specific look of someone who has just discovered a connection they didn't know to look for. "Earl Massey," Ray said slowly. "You knew him." Ray was quiet for a moment. "He taught the man who taught me," he said, 14 years ago, one summer, 3 months. He looked at Caleb with a different quality of attention now. "I never met Earl Massey, but there is not a day I work in this shop that I don't use something that came down from him through his apprentice to me." The shop was very quiet. "Show me your hands," Ray said. Caleb held them out. Ray looked at them the way a craftsman looks at tools assessing wear condition capacity. "You ever work a restoration?" "2 of them," Caleb said, "with my grandfather. A 68 Triumph and a 74 Harley Sportster. We did them over 2 summers. Ray looked at him for another long moment. "All right," he said, "come in the back." He led Caleb through the shop to a rear bay where a motorcycle sat on a lift in a state of careful disassembly. It was a project not damaged but being taken apart with intention, each piece arranged in a specific order that reflected a specific understanding of how it all went back together. Tell me what you see, Ray said. Caleb looked at it. He didn't rush. He walked around it slowly the way his grandfather had taught him. See the whole picture before you touch any part of it. Early 70s, he said. Harley probably a super glide by the frame geometry, but the forks are wrong for stock. Someone changed them. Primary cover's been replaced, not the original. The carb is newer, maybe 20 years old, not 50. He paused. Whoever took this apart knew what they were doing. The order of removal is correct. They were planning to come back to it. They didn't, Ray said. Why not? The owner died, Ray said. His wife brought it to me 8 months ago. She wants it finished. She wants it running the way it ran when her husband rode it. Caleb looked at the motorcycle on the lift. I can help with that, he said, quietly, not as a boast, as a statement of actual fact. Ray looked at him. I'm not offering you a job, he said. Not yet. I don't know you well enough. What I'm offering you is 3 days. You come in, you work, I watch. You do what you're told. At the end of 3 days, I'll tell you what I think. What does it pay? Caleb said. Because he needed to know. Because his mother needed to know. Ray named a figure, daily, cash. It was more than Caleb had made in any single day that summer. Yes, Caleb said. When do I start? Ray looked at him. You're already here, he said and handed him an apron. The 3 days that followed were the first 3 days in months that felt like forward motion instead of treading water. Caleb came in before 8 each morning and stayed until Ray locked up in the evening. He did not talk unless he was asked something. He did not offer opinions unless an opinion was requested. He worked the way his grandfather had taught him to work, with full attention and without shortcuts, because shortcuts in this kind of work were a form of lying. And lying to a machine always got discovered. Ray watched him, not obviously, not standing over his shoulder, but in the way of a man who misses nothing, occasional glances from across the shop, questions asked at specific moments to catch the nature of the thinking behind the action, the way a teacher tests not what you know, but how you know it. At the end of the first day, Ray said, "You're slower than I'd like." "I know," Caleb said. "I'm being careful." "Careful is good," Ray said. "Slow isn't always careful. Sometimes slow is just slow." "I'll work on it," Caleb said. At the end of the second day, Ray said nothing, which Caleb had learned by then was its own kind of evaluation. At the end of the third day, Ray leaned against the workbench and said, "You know who Grant Holloway is?" Caleb looked up. "Yes, sir." "Then you know he's got an interest in the building your family's renting." The air in the shop went very still. "I didn't know that," Caleb said. His voice came out level because he made it come out level, but something in his chest had just done the specific drop of a floor giving way. "Bear found it," Ray said. "Told me this morning. Holloway's a silent partner in the management company. The connection's not visible unless you look for it, but it's there." Caleb stood very still. He thought about his mother at the kitchen table. He thought about the rent 3 months overdue. He thought about the specific terrible vulnerability of a family whose housing depended on the goodwill of the man he had just testified against. "He's going to evict us," he said. "Not yet," Ray said, "but he's making noise about it. Vince Tully reached out to the property manager yesterday." "Who's Vince Tully?" "A man who does Holloway's dirty work at a distance. He called the property manager and mentioned that there were concerns about the lease status of your family's unit, that the back due rent was a technical violation, that Sun State Properties might want to revisit their obligations to the current tenants." Caleb processed this. "Because I gave a statement," he said. "Because you gave a statement," Ray confirmed. The shop was quiet except for the ambient sounds of the street outside. "What do I do?" Caleb said. "That's not a question for me," Ray said. "But I'll tell you this. Bear and Hawk are not people who let things sit. Whatever's being worked on at their end, it's being worked on." He paused. "The question for you is whether you hold your line or you walk it back." "I'm not walking it back," Caleb said immediately. Ray looked at him. "You understand what I'm saying? Walking it back means saying you weren't sure what you saw. It means your statement becomes uncertain. It means Holloway has nothing to pressure." "I know what it means," Caleb said. "And you're still saying no." "I saw what I saw," Caleb said. "He hit that bike and he drove away. That happened. I'm not going to say it didn't happen because he owns the building we live in. Ray Dominguez looked at him for a long moment. All right, he said. Then here's what I can tell you. You've got a job here if you want it. Real job, not 3-day trial. School schedule. I'll work around it when September comes. And if your family needs a place to be while this gets sorted, my sister has a spare room. She's been looking for a renter. Caleb stared at him. Why? He said, not rudely, genuinely, because the offer was large enough that he needed to understand the ground it was standing on. Ray was quiet for a moment. Because Earl Massey spent a summer teaching a young man who had no prospects and needed a chance, he said. And that man became the person who taught me everything I know about this work. And somewhere in the middle of that chain, your grandfather gave something without asking what he was going to get back. He looked at Caleb steadily. I'm not a complicated man. I believe things come around. Caleb looked at the floor for a moment. He was not going to cry. He had decided that months ago, not as a performance of toughness, but as a practical matter, because if he started, he wasn't sure he would stop. And stopping was not something the situation allowed. But he came close. Thank you, he said. I need to talk to my mom first about the room. Of course, Ray said. He walked home that evening with 3 days' pay in his pocket and a weight in his chest that was not the bad kind. It was the kind of weight that comes from carrying something real and knowing it matters. The evening desert light was doing its amber thing again. He walked through it thinking about his grandfather and about chains of people connected by what they give without asking for a return, and about how strange and specific it was that a walk to a truck stop on a highway in July had led him here. He was 2 blocks from home when his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. He answered. Caleb Walker. Not a question. A man's voice, middle-aged, the professional smoothness of someone who spent most of his time on the phone. Yes, Caleb said. My name is Vince Tully. I represent interests connected to Grant Holloway. I'm calling because I think there may be a misunderstanding about what you observed at the diner on Route 9 2 days ago, and I'm hoping we can clear that up. Caleb kept walking. There's no misunderstanding, he said. A pause. Son, I think you may not fully understand the situation your family is in with regard to their tenancy at. I understand it, Caleb said. Another pause. Longer this time. Mr. Holloway is prepared to be very generous in terms of the back due rent. Tully said, his voice shifting to something smoother, more reasonable. A complete forgiveness of the outstanding amount, in exchange for a simple clarification of your statement to Officer Briggs acknowledging that you may have been mistaken about certain details. Caleb stopped walking. He stood on the sidewalk 2 blocks from his house with his grandfather's 3 days' pay in his pocket and a man on the phone offering to erase his family's debt in exchange for a lie. And he felt the specific weight of the moment, the way you feel a temperature change all at once everywhere. He thought about his mother's hand on his. He thought about bare character as what you do when the cost is real. He said, tell Mr. Holloway that I appreciate the call. Tully waited. And tell him I'm not mistaken about what I saw. The silence on the line had a different quality now. The professional smoothness had developed a hairline crack. I want to be sure you understand what declining this offer means, Tully said. I understand it, Caleb said. Your family's lease is between my family and whoever actually owns the property, Caleb said. If Sun State Properties decides to evict us for back due rent, that's their legal right. But that doesn't change what I saw on Route 9. Those are 2 separate things. A long pause. That's a very mature perspective for someone your age, Tully said. The warmth had left his voice entirely now. Thank you, Caleb said. Have a good evening. He hung up. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, and he let himself feel the fear, the full specific fear of what he had just done, what it might cost, what it might mean for his mother and the house and everything he had been trying to hold together since May. He let himself feel it completely because he had learned this year that trying to avoid feeling something difficult only made you worse at making decisions about it. You had to feel it. Then you had to decide what you were going to do anyway. He put his phone in his pocket. He walked home. His mother was not in the kitchen when he came in. She was on the couch, and that told him the day had been harder than yesterday. He sat next to her and told her about Ridgeline Repair and Ray Dominguez and the job offer. He told her about the connection between Holloway and Sun State Properties, watching her face while he said it, watching the pieces come together in her expression in real time. He told her about Vince Tully's call, and he told her what he had said. She was quiet for a long time. "Caleb," she said. "I know," he said. "We could lose the house. I know. You gave up. He was offering to cancel all of it, baby. All the back rent. That's, I know what it is," he said. "I know exactly what it is." She looked at him. "I'm not angry," she said. "Not easily, but with the specific hard-won calm of a woman who has come to understand her son over 17 years. I'm scared. That's different." "I know it's different," he said. "What are we going to do?" He told her about Ray's sister's spare room. He told her what Ray had said about the chain, Earl Massey, the apprentice Ray now them. He watched her face while he said it, and he watched something move through her expression that he couldn't quite name. Grief maybe, or the specific tenderness that comes from hearing someone speak well of someone you've lost. "Your grandfather," she said softly. "Yeah," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "He would have done the same thing you did," she said. "On that phone call. I know. He would have been terrified, and he would have done it anyway." "Yeah," Caleb said. "Me too." She reached over and took his hand. They sat there together on the couch in the house that might or might not be theirs by the end of the week, in the desert town that Grant Holloway believed he owned, and they held on to each other in the quiet, practical, undramatic way of people who have run out of easy options and are choosing the harder ones on purpose. Caleb's phone buzzed. A text from Hawk's number. 4 words. "We know about Tully," and then 30 seconds later, a second message. "Don't move. We're coming." Caleb read it twice. He looked at his mother. "What?" she said. He showed her the phone. She read it again. Outside, the night was settling in over the desert, and somewhere on a highway that ran like a spine through this part of Arizona, engines were beginning to turn. But that was not the thing Caleb was thinking about. He was thinking about the lease, about the phone call with Tully, about the specific word the man had used, clarification. As if the truth were something that could be clarified into something else given the right pressure. He was thinking about what Hawk's text actually meant. "We know about Tully," which meant they had known before the call, which meant they had been monitoring not Caleb but Tully, which meant the network of people who knew what was happening was larger and faster than anyone who was not part of it would have guessed, which meant Grant Holloway had made his move against a boy who had no money and no power and no standing, and in doing so had handed that move to people who had all 3 things in sufficient quantity to make his calculation wrong. Caleb did not feel triumphant about this. He felt something more complicated, the specific gratitude of someone who has been standing in the open and suddenly understands they are not standing alone. He also felt the pull of a different fear, quieter and more precise than the fear of the eviction or the phone call. The fear that the people coming to help him might want something eventually. He looked at the card in his pocket, Marcus Reynolds. And he thought about Hawk's face in the parking lot when he had refused the $20. All right, Caleb Walker, not disappointment, not frustration, something closer to respect. He thought about the call coming, not the motorcycles, not yet, that was still hours away, but a specific phone call that had been made before he got home in a motel room by a quiet man with road miles in his face and a standard of people that was higher than most. Grant Holloway had made his calculation about Caleb Walker based on what he could see. A poor kid, no connections, no leverage, no future worth protecting. He had not seen what Caleb had earned that afternoon in the parking lot with a chamois cloth and a refusal to walk away from a straightforward truth. He had not seen what kind of people were now paying attention. By morning, that oversight was going to cost him more than he had planned to spend. The first thing Hawk did after sending those 2 texts was call a man named Pete Sorrell. Pete was not a Hell's Angel. He was a retired paralegal who had spent 22 years working for a law firm in Phoenix before deciding he was done with offices and moved out to the desert to raise goats and drink decent coffee and occasionally help people who needed a specific kind of help that didn't require a bar license. He was 63 years old, meticulous, and had a memory for property records and corporate filings that most people reserved for things they actually enjoyed. Hawk had used him twice before. Both times Pete had found what needed finding. Sun State Properties, Hawk said when Pete picked up. Silent partners, specifically anything connecting Grant Holloway. How fast, Pete said. Now. It's 9:30 at night. I know what time it is, Pete. The sound of a chair moving. coffee being poured, then keys. "Give me 40 minutes, Pete said. It took him 31. What Pete found and sent to Hawk in a series of photographs of hand-annotated documents, because Pete did not trust digital formatting and did everything longhand first, was not just a connection between Holloway and Sunstate Properties. It was a pattern. Holloway had silent interests in 4 property management companies across 2 counties. The arrangement was deliberate and structured, each company technically independent, each one traceable back to a holding entity called Red Rock Asset Group, and Red Rock traceable back to Holloway through 2 more layers of corporate names, all of them registered in the same 18-month window, 8 years ago. It was not illegal exactly, but it was the kind of structure you build when you want to be able to apply pressure to a tenant without your name appearing on the paperwork. Pete wrote at the bottom of the last page in his precise small handwriting, "This is what someone builds when they plan to use it. Not for profit, for control." Hawk read that line 3 times. Then he made the calls. Not all at once, not to everyone. He started with the 7 members who were closest geographically and otherwise, and let the information move from there, the way information moves through a network that has been functioning for decades, quickly, accurately, and without wasted steps. By midnight, there were 14 people who knew. By 2 in the morning, there were 30. By the time the desert began its slow shift from black to the deep pre-dawn blue that came before even the first gray light, the number was past 60. But Hawk was not thinking about numbers. He was thinking about what he had told Danny: "That boy stood up for your motorcycle when he had every reason not to." He was thinking about Pete's annotation. This is what someone builds when they plan to use it. He was thinking about the fact that somewhere in this town, a 17-year-old was lying awake in a house that a powerful man was quietly preparing to take from him, and the boy knew it, and he had still said to a professional fixer on a phone call 2 blocks from home, "Tell him I'm not mistaken about what I saw." Hawk had spent a long time in a world that sorted people by what they did when it cost them something real. He had seen men twice Caleb's age fold under pressure, a fraction of what this kid was carrying. He had seen people with resources and networks and lawyers give up things they claimed were non-negotiable the moment the negotiation became genuinely uncomfortable. The boy had nothing. He had given up a debt forgiveness that would have stabilized his family's entire situation. He had done it in about 30 seconds without asking anyone for advice, without hedging, without the words "I need to think about it." Hawk lay back on the motel bed and stared at the ceiling and thought, all right, Caleb did not sleep. He sat at the kitchen table after his mother went to bed, and he looked at Hawk's 2 texts until the screen timed out and went dark. And then he sat in the dark and he thought. Not anxiously, he had moved past anxious sometime around the 3rd hour of lying in bed, when anxiety had burned through its fuel and left something cleaner and colder in its place. He was thinking practically now, categorically. The way you think when you accept that the situation is what it is, and the only useful question is, what do you do about it? The eviction risk was real. The lease violation existed. 3 months back, rent was grounds enough, not morally but legally, and in Caleb's experience, those 2 things were not always the same address. His mother's health was variable. Some days she could work. Most days she couldn't. The good day she'd had today was not guaranteed tomorrow. The job at Ridgeline Repair was real, and it was immediate, and it paid better than anything he had found. But 1 week of wages, even at Ray's rate, did not close the gap. Ray's sister's spare room was an option, but moving his mother meant disruption, and disruption cost her health in ways that didn't always show up immediately. He looked at all of it. He thought about Hawk's text. "We're coming." He didn't know exactly what that meant. He had some ideas about what it might mean, but he had learned this summer that assuming you understood a situation completely was the specific kind of overconfidence that made you unprepared for what it actually turned out to be. He heard the first engine around 4:30 in the morning. He was still at the table. The neighborhood was completely quiet, that specific 4 a.m. quiet of a residential street in a small town, not quite night and not yet morning. The silence that belongs to people who are sleeping and dogs who have given up barking and the occasional car that has somewhere to be while everyone else doesn't. He heard the engine the way you hear a single instrument before the rest of the orchestra comes in. What do you know? Then before the sound of the first had fully registered, another, then a third. He stood up. He went to the front door and opened it and stood on the step, and he watched the motorcycles arrive. They did not come with noise designed to announce themselves. They came with the steady, purposeful sound of machines being handled by people who had long since stopped needing to prove anything with volume. One after another, they turned onto a street and slowed, and the sound of them together was something you felt as much as heard, not a roar, but a presence. A weight in the air. He counted without meaning to. He stopped at 30 and lost track. They filled the street. Hawk parked directly in front of the house. He came up the walk without hurrying. He was carrying a paper bag and a tray with 2 coffees. He looked at Caleb standing in the doorway at 4:30 in the morning, and he said, "You sleep at all?" "No," Caleb said. "Me either." He held out one of the coffees. "You drink coffee?" Caleb took it. "When did I start saying no to things?" The corner of Hawk's mouth moved. He came up the step, and Caleb stepped back and let him inside. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Caleb had sat with his mother, and looked at bills where he had made his list, where he had laid Hawk's card down that first evening and watched Emily Walker look at a name she didn't recognize and trusted anyway. "Tell me what Tully said," Hawk said. Caleb told him, word for word, as close as he could recall. Hawk listened without interrupting, holding his coffee, his expression doing nothing visible. When Caleb finished, Hawk said, "And you said no?" "Yes." "Without calling me first." Caleb looked at him. "I didn't know about the connection between Holloway and the property company. Not until Ray told me after the call." "But you knew there was risk." "Yes." "And you still said no." "You sound surprised," Caleb said. "I'm not surprised," Hawk said. "I'm making sure I understand you." He looked at Caleb steadily. "Because what I'm about to tell you is going to require you to understand something about how this works." "Okay," Caleb said. Hawk put both hands around his coffee cup. "Last night I had a man pull the corporate records on Sun State Properties and every related entity connected to Grant Holloway's holdings in this county. What we found is not a man who owns a piece of a property company. It's a system. He has silent interests in 4 separate management companies. He uses them selectively. Mostly they just collect rent. But occasionally when someone crosses him, he uses the property connection to apply pressure. Quiet pressure. The kind that looks like normal business until you understand the pattern." Caleb was very still. "He's done this before," he said. "At least 3 times that we can document," Hawk said. "A woman who complained to the county about one of his construction sites' noise ordinance, safety violations. She was renting through a company connected to Red Rock. She got an eviction notice within 10 days of filing. A man who went to the zoning board about a Holloway development encroaching on agricultural land. Same thing, and one more, a small business owner who had a public dispute with Holloway about a parking arrangement." He paused. "All 3 of them left quietly. The complaints were dropped or withdrawn." Caleb thought about his father, about the warehouse, about the complaint Robert Walker had signed his name to and what had happened afterward. "My father," he said. Hawk looked at him. "Before he left," Caleb said slowly, "my mom told me last night. He signed a complaint against a company that Holloway had an interest in. Safety violations at the warehouse. And then the warehouse closed." He looked at Hawk. "Is that part of the pattern?" Hawk was quiet for a moment. "We looked at that too," he said, after Bear mentioned what your mother had said. "And the warehouse closure was legitimate. The company was struggling financially. The closure was probably coming regardless. But the timing," Hawk said carefully, "is consistent with Holloway accelerating something that would have happened anyway. Deciding that a struggling warehouse with a complaining employee was not worth keeping afloat." He paused. "We can't prove that, but the pattern is there." Caleb sat with them. There was something almost releasing about it. Not relief exactly, but the specific sensation of a piece of information settling into a space where your understanding had always had a gap. His father had left. His father had been weak, had chosen disappearance over difficulty, had handed his family a wound, and walked away from it. Caleb did not forgive that. He had no interest in excusing it. But now there was context, not justification. Context, and context was different from excuse. "What does it mean for us?" he said. "Right now." "Right now," Hawk said. "It means that Holloway's pattern is documented. Pete, the man who pulled the records, has prepared a summary. It names the 3 prior incidents with dates, the corporate structure, the Red Rock connection. It's not a legal filing yet, But it's organized, it's accurate, and it's going to a specific reporter at the Arizona Daily Star who has been looking for a way into Holloway's business practices for about 2 years. Caleb looked at him. A reporter. Men like Holloway are not afraid of lawyers, Hawk said. They have lawyers. They're not afraid of police. They have relationships with police. But they are afraid of their name in a newspaper next to the phrase, pattern of tenant retaliation. That is the thing that costs them what they actually value. Which is what, Caleb said. The appearance of being legitimate, Hawk said. Everything Holloway has is built on the ability to sit in a room with county officials and bankers and business partners and be treated like a man of standing. You put his name in a story about using property management companies to silence people who cross him, that standing starts to crack. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the street was still full of motorcycles. Still full of the presence of people who had come somewhere in the middle of the night because a boy had told the truth. What about the eviction? Caleb said. The eviction notice, Hawk said, is going to arrive. Probably today or tomorrow. We can't stop it from being issued. But here's what we can do. He reached into the paper bag and placed an envelope on the table. Caleb looked at it. That covers your back rent in full, Hawk said, plus the next 3 months forward, which means the lease violation that Holloway's been saving as a weapon no longer exists. He can't evict you for back rent you've paid. Caleb did not touch the envelope. He looked at it the way he had looked at the $20 bill in the parking lot, with the specific tension of someone who has a principle about this kind of thing and is now being asked to decide whether the principle still applies. Hawk, he said. I know, Hawk said. I can't just take. It's not a gift, Hawk said. It's a loan with no interest and no timeline. You pay it back when you can in whatever increments make sense. Ray Dominguez has agreed to hold the accounting. When you're on your feet, you pay Ray. He'll see it gets where it needs to go. Caleb looked at the envelope. Why, he said. The same question he had asked Ray. Because the offer was large enough that he needed the ground under it. Hawk looked at him across the kitchen table in the pre-dawn quiet. Because 3 days ago, a kid I'd never met walked into a parking lot with a dirty rag and asked to work for a sandwich, he said. Because when something happened in that parking lot, he stood up when standing up cost him something real. Because Vince Tully called him last night and offered to make his family's biggest problem disappear. And he said no in 30 seconds without asking anyone's permission. He paused. And because your grandfather gave something to a chain of people that eventually got to me, and I believe things come around. He said the last part without drama, as a statement of fact. Caleb looked at the envelope. He thought about his grandfather. He thought about the chain, Earl Massey to an apprentice to Ray Dominguez, to whoever came next. He thought about Bear character is what you do when the cost is real. He thought about his mother asleep in the next room and the bills on the table, and the specific exhausting arithmetic of a family running on less than they need month after month after month. He picked up the envelope. Okay, he said quietly. Hawk nodded once. The front door opened. Emily Walker stood in the doorway in her bathrobe, her hair loose, looking at the man sitting at her kitchen table, and then at the window where through the glass the unmistakable shapes of a street full of motorcycles were visible in the thin pre-dawn light. She looked at Caleb. What is happening? She said. Mom? He said. This is Hawk. Emily looked at the man across the table. Hawk stood the way men of a certain generation stand when a woman enters a room, an instinct that had survived everything else. Ma'am, he said. Emily looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the envelope on the table, then at her son. Caleb, she said. It's a loan, he said. No interest. Paid through Ray at the shop when I can. She looked at the envelope for a long time. Then she looked at Hawk. My father, she said. Earl Massey. I know who he was, Hawk said, indirectly, through people he touched. Emily nodded slowly. The gesture had something of resolution in it, the specific nod of a woman who has been carrying something for a long time and has just understood where it was always headed. Coffee, she said. Please, said Hawk. She went to the kitchen, and the morning small and ordinary and enormous began. Bear arrived an hour later with Danny Reyes and 4 other riders. They came to the door the way people come to a place they've been before, not intrusively, but with the ease of people who understand the difference between a home and a space they're passing through. Danny shook Caleb's hand. He held it a moment. I heard about the phone call, he said. Tully. It was a short call, Caleb said. Bear told me what you said. Caleb shrugged. I meant it, he said. Danny looked at him. The expression on his face was not what Caleb had expected. It was not gratitude exactly, or not only gratitude. It was something more complicated. The expression of a man who has spent the better part of a year putting himself back together, piece by piece, and has just witnessed something that reminded him why the work was worth it. My bike, Danny said. I know, Caleb said. I'm sorry. Would you help me fix it? Caleb looked at him, at Ridgeline. Ray said it's fine by him. After hours, weekends, whatever works. The frame's bent, but it's fixable. The tank, he paused. The tank can be repainted. It won't be the same, but it can be good again. Caleb thought about what Ray had said. She wants it finished. She wants it running the way it ran when her husband rode it. He thought about the chain of careful hands and patient attention that made a damaged thing whole again. Yes, he said, I'll help. Danny nodded. Something settled in his face. Bear from across the room said, all right, now can someone tell me where the coffee is, because I've been awake since midnight and I'm not as young as I pretend to be. Emily from the kitchen. Sit down, I'll get it. And the house that had been quiet and tight and full of the specific anxiety of people holding on by margins in mathematics suddenly became for a few hours something else. Something Caleb had not felt in the particular way you feel it when it returns a house with people in it, with noise, with the simple, irreducible presence of other human beings who had chosen to be in the same place. He sat in the middle of it and felt it without trying to explain it. The eviction notice arrived at 11:15 that morning, a formal document from Sun State Properties citing breach of lease terms under the back due rent provision, demanding full payment or vacated premises within 30 days. It was signed by someone Caleb didn't recognize, a property manager, whose name appeared at the bottom of a letterhead that bore no indication of the man who had effectively ordered it sent. Caleb looked at it, then he picked up his phone and called Ray Dominguez. The notice came, he said. I know, Ray said. I got a call from Pete Sorrell 20 minutes ago. He's already prepared the response letter. It documents full payment of outstanding rent. I'm going to courier the funds to Sun State today, certified with proof of receipt. The notice becomes void the moment the payment is received and acknowledged. And Holloway is about to find out that the leverage he was holding evaporated overnight, Ray said. And Pete's summary is going to the reporter this afternoon. How long before it's in the paper? A week, maybe two. The reporter needs to verify independently. But she's been sitting on this story waiting for the thread, and Pete gave her the thread. Caleb thought about that. What does Holloway do when he finds out? He calculates, Ray said. Same as always. The question is whether the calculation still favors coming after you or whether walking away becomes the cheaper option. And if it doesn't, if he still comes, Ray was quiet for a moment. Then we cross that when we get there, he said. But Caleb, there are 90 people in your corner right now who know the full picture. That changes the math. He looked at the eviction notice in his hand. He thought about the man in the blue truck, looking in his rearview mirror, making his calculation in 3 seconds, deciding that driving away was cheaper than stopping. He thought about what it felt like to make a different kind of calculation. Ray, he said, yeah. Thank you for calling Bear. A pause. I called Bear because what you did in that parking lot was worth responding to, Ray said. And because your grandfather would have done the same thing for anyone in that situation, and I'm not going to be the person who breaks that chain. Another pause. Now stop thanking me and come in tomorrow morning. That super glide isn't going to restore itself. Caleb put the phone down. He put the eviction notice on the kitchen table. He sat in the chair where he had spent so many early mornings looking at numbers that didn't add up. And he looked at the document that was supposed to be a weapon, and he felt something clarify inside him. Not triumph because this wasn't over, but a clear-eyed understanding of where he stood and what he was able to do about it. That was new. Not the courage to stand up, he had always had that, or had always tried to have it, but the understanding that standing up was not something you had to do alone. That was the thing he had been missing. That was the thing the last 72 hours had given him. His mother appeared in the doorway. She looked at the eviction notice on the table. It came, she said, yes. She came and looked at it, read it. Ray's responding today, Caleb said. Full payment, certified. It voids the notice. She looked at him. And after that, he said, "We see what Holloway decides." She sat down across from him. They looked at each other across the table that had been the site of so many of this summer's serious conversations. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Okay." "That first morning," what she said, "after your father left, you sat down at this table and you asked me to show you everything. All the bills, all the numbers." "I remember," he said. "You were 16 years old," she said, "and I showed you because you asked in a way I couldn't say no to, and you made a list." "Yeah. I need you to know something about that," she said, "about what it meant to me that you did that. Not the fixing of it, the asking to see it." He looked at her. "Other people would have run," she said. "From the numbers, from the problem, from the whole thing. Your father ran." She said it without bitterness now, with the clean, factual tone of someone who has processed something all the way through. "But you sat down and said, 'Show me everything,' and then you made a list." She reached across and put her hand over his. "I need you to know that was enough. Even if nothing else had worked. Even if we'd lost the house and had nowhere to go, and Hawk never showed up, the fact that you did, that was enough." Caleb looked at his mother. He felt the full weight of everything she was saying, and he let himself feel it, and he did not look away. "I wasn't going to let us fall," he said. "I know," she said. "I know you weren't." Outside, the last of the motorcycles were moving. Some had stayed through the morning, others had come and gone. Through the early hours, a chapter drifting through in the organic way of people who have a network and know how to use it. The sound of the engines was not loud, but it was present, and presence, Caleb had learned, was its own kind of statement. Bear knocked on the open door. "We're heading out," he said. "Hawk said to tell you he'll be in touch this week. The reporter's going to want to talk to you, not right now, when Pete gives the go-ahead." "That okay?" "Yes," Caleb said. Bear looked at him, then at Emily. "You doing all right, Mrs. Walker?" Emily looked at this large man with a red beard who had appeared in her kitchen at 4:30 in the morning and drunk 3 cups of her coffee and asked for nothing. "Better than yesterday," she said. Bear nodded. "That's the direction you want," he said. He tapped the door frame, twice a small, informal goodbye, and went. Caleb watched him go. He thought about what Hawk had said we know about Tully, the speed of it, the specific efficiency of people who cared about something and had been doing things about the things they cared about for a long time. He thought about Vince Tully's voice on the phone. Professional, smooth, the carefully constructed tone of a man who had learned to make pressure sound like reason. He thought about what it had felt like to say no, not the fear that came after, not the calculation, the actual moment of saying it, the 2 words, "I'm not mistaken," and the specific sensation of something inside him settling into place the way a joint settles when you stop holding it wrong. He picked up the eviction notice from the table. He folded it in half. He put it in the kitchen drawer where they kept things that needed to be kept. Then he went to the kitchen and made his mother lunch because she hadn't eaten yet, and she needed to eat, and because some things in the middle of all the other things remained simple and necessary and worth doing without making them more than they were. He was at the stove when his phone buzzed, a text from a number he didn't recognize. He opened it. It was a name, Sandra Reeves, Arizona Daily Star. And below that, "I'd like to talk when you're ready. No rush. I have enough to start. But your story matters." Caleb put the phone down. He kept making lunch. But in the specific quiet of the kitchen in the house that was still theirs in the town that Grant Holloway believed he owned, something had shifted. It had been shifting since the morning in the parking lot, since the sound of a truck hitting a motorcycle, since a boy had stepped forward and said, "I did." The shift was not complete. Holloway was still out there. The story was not done. The morning had brought Hawk and Bear and the envelope and the response to the eviction notice, but none of that was the ending. It was the turn. The place where the weight that had been pressing down began to redistribute itself. And in a county office across town, in a conversation between a property manager named Ted Brierly and a man named Vince Tully, the dynamic was already changing. Because Ted Brierly had just received a certified check for the full amount of the Walker family's outstanding rent, and along with it, a letter from a paralegal named Pete Sorrell that used the phrase "pattern of retaliatory eviction" 8 times in 3 pages, and cited 4 specific incidents with dates, and mentioned the Arizona Daily Star by name in the final paragraph. Ted Brierly was not a brave man. He was not a principled man particularly. He was a property manager who had been doing a favor for a silent partner who had never before created a situation that could be described in a formal letter using the phrase pattern of retaliatory eviction. He picked up his phone. He called Vince Tully. "We have a problem," he said. And 40 miles away, in an office with a leather chair and a view, Grant Holloway listened to Vince Tully describe the problem, and for the first time since a 17-year-old boy had stepped forward in a parking lot and refused to look away, the calculation came out different. Ted Brierley did not sleep well that night. He was the kind of man who had built his entire professional life on staying invisible, on being the person in the middle. The name on the paperwork, the voice that made the calls that other people wanted made without wanting their fingerprints on the phone. He had been doing that for 11 years with Sun State Properties in the broader Red Rock arrangement, and in 11 years, nothing had ever come back toward him in a way that felt like personal exposure. Pete Sorrell's letter had used his name 4 times, not Holloway's name, not Red Rock, his. Ted Brierley, property manager, Sun State Properties. Ted Brierley, who had received a call from Vince Tully and initiated eviction proceedings against a tenant in arrears. Ted Brierley, whose signature was on the notice that had arrived at the Walker residence at 11:15 on a Tuesday morning. He read the letter twice more that night. Then he called his brother-in-law, who was a real estate attorney in Scottsdale, and described the situation without naming names. His brother-in-law said, "How many prior incidents?" 3, boyfriend, Ted said. "Documented." A pause. With dates, corporate structure, and a connection to the holding entity. Another pause longer. "Ted," his brother-in-law said, "whoever put this together knew exactly what they were doing. This isn't a bluff. This is a file." Ted stared at his ceiling. "What do I do?" "You stop," his brother-in-law said. "You stop everything, you document that you stopped it, and you create as much distance as possible between yourself and whatever your silent partner wants to do next." He's not going to like that. Ted, a man who will throw you under a bus to protect himself is not someone whose approval is worth the legal exposure. Ted hung up. He sat in the dark for a while. Then he called Vince Tully and said, "Tell Grant we're withdrawing the eviction notice. I'm sending a formal letter to the Walkers tomorrow morning." Vince's voice went very flat. "You need to think carefully about." "I've thought about it," Ted said. "Tell him." He hung up again. He did not call Vince Tully back when Vince called 3 more times that night. Caleb found out about the withdrawal the same way he found out about most things in those days, through Ray Dominguez, who had developed a habit of calling before 7 in the morning when there was something Caleb needed to know before he arrived at the shop. "Brierley withdrew it," Ray said. "Formal letter. Acknowledges full payment received, considers the matter closed, lease remains in good standing." Caleb sat on the edge of his bed. "That's it," he said. "That's it," Ray said. "On the eviction." "What about Holloway?" "Holloway," Ray said carefully, "is dealing with a different kind of problem this morning." Sandra Reeves ran the story. Caleb went still. Already, she had enough to go with. She'd been building toward this for 2 years. Pete's summary gave her the connective tissue she needed. It ran in the online edition at 6 this morning. Print tomorrow. A pause. It's detailed, Caleb. Corporate structure, the 4 incidents, including yours, the connection to the warehouse closure. She was careful. Everything is framed as documented pattern and credible allegation, but it names him front and center. Caleb said nothing for a moment. He looked at his hands. "Did she use my name?" "She refers to you as a 17-year-old witness who declined to retract his statement despite pressure. She doesn't name you because you're a minor, but anyone who was at that diner knows who it is." Caleb nodded slowly. "How bad is it for him?" Ray exhaled. He had a breakfast meeting with 2 county commissioners this morning. Both of them canceled before 6:30. His construction company's project manager called in sick, which everyone understands to mean he's waiting to see which way the wind blows. And Holloway's lawyer issued a statement at 7 saying his client strongly disputes the characterizations in the article and will be exploring all legal options. Which means he's rattled and he's performing composure, Ray said. Men like Holloway explore legal options when they're on offense. When they're on defense, legal options is what you say when you don't have a good next move. Caleb sat with that. "Ray," he said. "Yeah. Is it over?" Ray was quiet for a moment. "The immediate threat to your family, yes. The larger thing," he paused. I think Holloway is going to spend a long time dealing with consequences that don't go away fast. Reputational damage with people whose opinion he needs for business is the thing men like him feel most. That story is going to be findable every time someone searches his name for the next decade. What about the people before us, the woman with the zoning complaint, the man who went to the county board? Sandra Reeves is already following up with them, Ray said. She reached out yesterday before the story ran. Whether they want to talk is up to them, but they'll know someone looked. Caleb nodded. Come in at 9, Ray said. The Superglide isn't going to wait forever. Caleb put the phone down. He went to the kitchen. His mother was already there. A good morning. A coffee morning, which still felt like a gift rather than a given, but was becoming more frequent. She was at the table with a cup of tea and the newspaper, though the story hadn't made print yet, and she wouldn't see it until tomorrow. She looked at his face when he came in, and she said, "Tell me." He told her. All of it. The withdrawal, the story. The commissioner's canceling. He watched her face move through the information the way water moves through landscape, finding the low places, filling them, settling. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Your grandfather used to say that the truth is patient." Caleb looked at her. He'd say people get in trouble because they think they have to make things happen on their own timeline, she said. He'd say the truth doesn't need your help with the timing, it just needs you to keep telling it. Caleb thought about standing in the parking lot, about the moment of stepping forward, about Vince Tully's call and the 30-second decision that had felt terrifying, and had also, underneath the terror, felt like the only possible thing. He poured himself coffee and sat across from his mother, and they drank in the quiet of the morning together, which was its own kind of conversation. He was at Ridgeline Repair by 8:55. Ray was already in the back bay with Danny Reyes' motorcycle on the lift. Danny had brought it in the day before on a trailer, and in the evening light, Ray had done his initial assessment, made notes on a legal pad, in the careful handwriting of a man who thought through his hands. This morning, he handed Caleb the pad without preamble. "Tell me what you agree with and what you'd added," he said. Caleb read through it. He took his time. He asked 2 clarifying questions about the frame assessment and one about the electrical. Then he handed it back. "The wiring harness needs attention before you start on the frame," he said. "If the impact transferred enough force to bend the frame, it moved the harness too. You fix the frame first, you might not catch what shifted until after reassembly." Ray looked at him. "That's right," he said. "That's not in my notes." "Your notes are good," Caleb said. "That's just what I'd add." Ray made the addition in the margin, looked at it, looked at Caleb. "Your grandfather really did teach you," he said. "It was not a compliment in the casual sense. It was an acknowledgement, the specific acknowledgement of a craftsman recognizing the influence of another craftsman's hand in the work of someone younger." "Every summer," Caleb said, until he couldn't. They worked. The hours in the shop had become the center of Caleb's days in a way he had not anticipated and would have been hard-pressed to explain to someone who had not experienced it. There was something about the work itself, the methodical, patient, undeniable physicality of taking a damaged thing and understanding it well enough to make it whole again, that settled him in a way nothing else had since May. In the shop, there was no arithmetic of insufficiency. There was only the machine, and what it needed, and whether you were paying enough attention to give it that. He understood in the shop what his grandfather had been doing all those summers. Not just teaching him mechanics, teaching him the discipline of full presence, teaching him that most problems approached with enough patience and enough attention revealed their own solution. That the solution was already inside the problem, waiting for the right quality of looking. Danny came in at noon with sandwiches. He stood at the bench eating and watching Caleb work on the wiring harness with the focused quiet of someone who is thinking about something other than what he's looking at. "How's your mom?" Danny said. "Better," Caleb said without stopping. "Good days more often." "That's good." A pause. "My ex-wife went through something similar. Took a long time, but she came back." He said it without self-pity as a piece of information, a data point. "People are more durable than the hard part makes you think." Caleb looked up at him briefly. "What happened with you two?" he said. Not intrusively, they had developed over the hours in the shop the specific ease of people working toward the same thing, who have stopped needing to be careful with each other. "Too much road," Danny said. "Too much time being someone who was better at leaving than staying." He was quiet for a moment. The bike was part of how I stopped doing that, started building something instead of always being on the way somewhere else. Caleb thought about that. And now the bike needs rebuilding, he said. Danny looked at the motorcycle on the lift. Yeah, he said, but I think that's okay. I think I can handle it differently this time. Caleb nodded. He went back to the wiring harness. They worked through the afternoon. At 4:15, Ray's phone rang. He took it in the front office and Caleb heard the low murmur of his voice without being able to make out the words. He came back 5 minutes later with an expression that was not quite neutral. That was Pete Searle, Ray said. Caleb set down his tool. Holloway's lawyer called him this morning, Ray said. Not Pete. Pete doesn't have a license. He was clear about that. The lawyer called because Pete's name is on the Camry that went to Sandra Reeves and they wanted to understand the scope of what's documented. What did Pete say? Pete said he'd be happy to discuss it and named a consulting fee that was high enough to make the point that this conversation wasn't going to be free. Ray almost smiled. The lawyer said they'd be in touch. What does that mean? It means Holloway is trying to figure out how much of the documentation is comprehensive and whether there are additional incidents that haven't surfaced yet, Ray said. It means he's more worried than he's showing publicly. Are there additional incidents? Ray looked at him steadily. Pete thinks at least 2 more. He's still pulling records. The pattern goes back further than we initially thought. The shop was quiet. Caleb looked at the motorcycle on the lift, at the careful order of parts arranged around it, at the legal pad with Ray's notes and his own addition in the margin. He's not going to come after my family again, he said. Not a question. No, Ray said. The calculus has shifted too far. Coming after your family now means adding to the documented pattern, which means adding to Sandra Reeves' story, which is the last thing he can afford. He paused. You're not worth the cost to him anymore. That sounds harsh, but it's actually what protection looks like in this situation. Caleb understood that. He picked up his tool and went back to work. That evening, walking home, he had started walking home in the evenings as a choice rather than a necessity, because the walk gave him time to decompress in a way that sitting still did not. His phone rang, and it was Hawk. You see the story, Hawk said. Ray told me about it this morning, Caleb said. Sandra Reeves is good, Hawk said. She did what good reporters do, let the facts make the argument so she doesn't have to. How's Danny's insurance claim going, Caleb said. Because that was still the original thing, the motorcycle in the parking lot, the bent frame, the scratched tank, and in the weight of everything that had happened since he hadn't wanted to lose track of it. Filed and accepted, Hawk said. Holloway's personal auto policy is covering the damage. His insurer wasn't thrilled, but there was a police report and a witness statement, so there wasn't much argument to make. Good, Caleb said. A pause. How are you, Hawk said. It was a simple question, and Hawk was not a man who asked simple questions idly. Caleb thought about it for a moment. Really thought about it. He looked at the desert evening around him, the amber light, the specific quality of the air after a day of heat, the way the sky out here did things to color that people who hadn't grown up here found hard to believe. I think I'm okay, he said. Actually okay, not just saying it. Good, Hawk said. Hawk, Caleb said. Yeah. That first day, in the parking lot, when you said, first you eat. He paused. You didn't know me. You didn't know anything about me. No, Hawk said. So why? A pause, longer than Hawk's pauses usually were. Because you came in with a cloth in your hand and asked to work for it, Hawk said. You didn't ask for the sandwich. You asked to earn the sandwich. That's not nothing. He was quiet for a moment. And because I was 17 once a long time ago in a situation that had nothing to recommend it, and someone stopped. Who? Caleb said. Man named Gerald Fitch, Hawk said. Owned a gas station outside Flagstaff. Let me sleep in the back room for 3 weeks and paid me to pump gas until I figured out what I was doing. A pause. He died in 2003. I never paid him back in any direct sense. But you stopped for me, Caleb said. That's the deal, Hawk said simply. You can't always pay it back. You pay it forward and you hope the chain holds. The chain. The same word Ray had used. The same concept his mother had described when she talked about Earl Massey and The Apprentice and the link that ran through decades of people who had given something without asking what they were going to get. It holds, Caleb said. Yeah, Hawk said. It does. 3 weeks later, Sandra Reeves's follow-up story ran. It was longer than the first one. It included the testimony of two of the three prior tenants, the woman who had filed the noise complaint and the small business owner who had lost his parking dispute. The third, the man from the zoning board, had declined to speak, but had confirmed the basic facts off the record. The story detailed the full Red Rock structure, named the 4 property management companies, and included a response from Holloway's attorney that was 3 paragraphs of denial, specific enough to suggest they were genuinely worried. The county commissioners who had canceled their breakfast meeting with Holloway did not reschedule. The construction project lost its lead subcontractor, who cited scheduling conflicts that everyone understood to mean reputational distance. 2 months after that, the Arizona Real Estate Board announced a review of Sun State Properties management practices, citing the Reeves articles as having raised questions requiring examination. Ted Brierley cooperated fully. Vince Tully stopped returning calls from everyone connected to the situation. Grant Holloway did not disappear. Men with that kind of money and that kind of structure don't disappear, but he receded. The specific casual impunity that had let him look in a rearview mirror and drive away, that had let him send Vince Tully to pressure a 17-year-old boy, that had let him build a system of silent property interests designed for use as leverage, that receded. The town still had him in it, but the town also knew more about him than it had before, and that knowledge, once it existed, could not be unmade. Caleb started school in September. Ray worked around it without being asked, early mornings before first period, long Saturdays, and occasional evening when the project required it. The Super Glide was coming along the way. A good restoration always comes along slowly, steadily, with each stage revealing the next in a logic that felt inevitable once you were inside it. Danny came in most Saturdays. He and Caleb had developed the specific, comfortable partnership of two people who were good at the same thing in slightly different ways and had learned to make use of that difference. Danny was faster and more intuitive. Caleb was more methodical and caught things Danny's speed occasionally skipped over. Together, they were better than either of them alone. One Saturday in October, Danny stepped back from the bike and looked at it. The frame fully straightened, the wiring harness corrected, the mechanical work 90% complete, and said, "She's going to be right." Caleb looked at it. "Yeah," he said, "she is." Danny was quiet for a moment. "You know," he said, "when it happened, when I came out of the diner and saw it on the ground, I thought about everything that was in that bike, all the time, all the choices, all the hours." He paused. "I thought some things can't be put back." "And," Caleb said. Danny looked at the motorcycle. "And some things can," he said. "You just need the right hands." Caleb looked at his hands. His grandfather's hands, in a sense. The hands Earl Massey had shaped over 3 summers through the particular education of showing rather than explaining. The hands that had carried a chamois cloth on a highway in July and walked into a parking lot full of Hell's Angels and asked not for a gift, but for a chance to earn one small thing. Those hands. Emily Walker had a doctor's appointment in November that produced the kind of news that makes you sit in a car afterward and breathe slowly for a while. Not catastrophic news. The opposite of catastrophic. The doctor used words like significant improvement and functional recovery and cautiously returned to limited work. Emily sat in the passenger seat of Ray Dominguez's sister's car. Carmen had become a fixture in their life, in the way that good neighbors become fixtures, incrementally and then completely, and she said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "I want to go back to teaching." She had been a substitute teacher before the illness. The school district had kept her on the sub list out of what she had always assumed was administrative inertia, and now understood might have been something more deliberate. She called the district office that afternoon. They said, "Come in Monday." Caleb got home that evening to find his mother at the kitchen table with a mug of tea and an expression he had not seen since before his father left, a specific, calm, forward-facing expression that did not have any of the quality of holding on in it. It was the expression of someone who had come through something and was looking at what was on the other side. "Monday," she said when he came in. He looked at her. "You're serious," he said. "I'm serious," she said. He sat across from her. For a moment, they just looked at each other, and between them was the full weight of everything that year had been the morning his father left the numbers on the table. The walk to the truck stop, the parking lot, the chamois cloth, the sandwich, the phone call to Tully, the eviction notice that was now folded in a kitchen drawer as a document that had tried to be a weapon and hadn't managed it. All of it was between them, understood and unspoken, the way things are between people who have been through something together. "Mom," he said. "Yeah, baby. We're going to be okay." She looked at him with the expression of a woman who has been told this before by people who couldn't deliver it and who is now hearing it from the one person she believes. "Yeah," she said, "we are." The first weekend of December, Danny Reyes rode his motorcycle out of Ridgeline Repair for the first time since July. Caleb stood in the parking lot next to Ray and watched him take it out onto the road and listened to the engine, and an engine he had helped rebuild, that he understood from the inside out, that he had put back together with the specific patience his grandfather had taught him, and the sound it made was clean and strong and right. Danny came back around the block and pulled in and sat on the bike for a moment with his hands on the bars, not saying anything. Then he looked at Caleb. "She's better than before," he said. "We found a few things while we had her open," Caleb said. "Addressed them while we were in there." Danny shook his head slowly. "Your grandfather," he said. "He raised you right even after he was gone." Caleb looked at the motorcycle. "Ray helped," he said. "Ray had something to work with," Danny said. "Niso?" 3 days before Christmas, Hawk called. "We're doing a run through your town on the 23rd, and he said, holiday thing. Some families we check on this time of year, make sure people have what they need." A pause. "My dear man. Your street is on the route." "How many?" Caleb said. "Probably 60, Hawk said. "Give or take." Caleb looked out his kitchen window at the street. "I'll tell my mom," he said. "Tell her not to cook," Hawk said. "We're bringing food." "She's going to cook anyway," Caleb said. "Yeah," Hawk said. "I figured." On the 23rd, 62 motorcycles came down Caleb's street in the mid-afternoon, and Emily Walker had in fact cooked a full meal because she was Emily Walker, and she was back on her feet, and this was what she did. And the house that had spent most of a year feeling like a place of siege became something else entirely. Carmen from next door came over. Ray and his wife came. A few of the neighbors who had watched the summer's events from a cautious distance came, because 60 motorcycles parked on your street is the kind of thing that overcomes social hesitation. Bear sat in the living room with a plate of food and talked to Emily about Earl Massey for 45 minutes, extracting stories from her that Caleb had never heard, because Bear was the kind of man who understood that the best way to honor someone was to know them thoroughly, and because Emily had needed for a long time someone to ask. Hawk found Caleb in the kitchen. They stood at the counter with coffee apart from the noise of the other rooms, comfortable. In the specific way they had become comfortable, two people who understood each other's baseline without needing to perform anything on top of it. "You good?" Hawk said. "Yeah," Caleb said. "You got him?" "Yeah," Hawk said. A pause. "Ray tells me you're good," Hawk said. "In the shop." "Ray's exacting," Caleb said. "I'm getting there. He told me about the wiring harness, what you caught before he got to it." Caleb shrugged. "My grandfather showed me that." "Your grandfather showed you a lot of things," Hawk said. "He showed me what he could in the time he had a son," Caleb said. "And then carefully, you and Bear and Ray, you showed me the rest." Hawk looked at him. "We didn't show you anything," he said. "We just got out of the way of what was already there." From the living room came the sound of Bear laughing at something Emily had said, and the warm noise of a house full of people who had chosen to be there, and the smell of food that had been cooked with intention by a woman who was back on her feet and intended to stay that way. Caleb looked at his hands around the coffee cup. He thought about July, about the highway and the heat and the 5-mile walk and the moment of standing in the parking lot with a dirty cloth in his hands, terrified and forward-moving and completely without options, except the one option that had always been available to him, the choice of what kind of person to be when it was costing him something. He thought about Vince Tully's voice, time-sensitive. He thought about the 30 seconds it had taken him to say no. He thought about Danny Reyes's hand on the scratched tank, about the sound of an engine that had been taken apart and put back together correctly. He thought about his grandfather at the workbench, 40 years of it, showing a boy how to see a machine all the way through, not the surface, the underneath. He thought about chains, about what it meant to be a link in one, not the first link and not the last. Just the link that held when it was tested, that passed the load forward, that didn't break when the weight came down on it. He thought about the boy who had walked into a parking lot with a chamois cloth and asked not for a gift, but for the chance to earn something small, and the man who had said, "First you eat," and every single thing that had followed from those two moments, the meal, the testimony, the $20 refused the phone call, the file, the story, the eviction notice in the drawer, the motorcycle engine running clean, his mother's face at the kitchen table saying, "Yeah, we are." All of it traceable back to a single step forward. All of it originating in the choice to say what was true when lying would have been cheaper and easier, and no one who mattered would have blamed him for it. Outside, the December evening was coming down over the desert, and the street held the shapes of 62 motorcycles, and inside the house that was theirs, fully legally, unthreateningly theirs, the noise of people who had come to check on family filled every room. Caleb Walker set down his coffee. He was 17 years old, and he had nothing, and he had everything, and he understood now that those two things were not opposites, that what you had was not measured in what you could put a number on, but in what you had built and what you had held and what you had refused to give away, even when giving it away would have made the day easier. He had held the truth had held him back. And the boy who had walked into that parking lot with a dirty cloth and no options had become, without ceremony and without announcement, exactly the person his grandfather had spent 3 summers trying to build, the person who did not skip the parts. Other people skipped, who paid attention to the underneath, who knew that any fool can break something, but it takes patience to make something last. That was what remained when everything else had been tested. That was what no one could take. That was enough, and then because of everything that had followed from it, it became far more than enough. It became a life worth the living, built from the ground up, one honest moment at a time.